God sanctifies himself through holy people. In past years, we discussed what a Kiddush Hashem is, what a Kiddush Hashem is not. Apparently, this act of Nadav and Avihu, when they attempt to offer the incense and they are stricken down by God, is viewed by Moshe Rabbeinu as a Kiddush Hashem. And in past years, we've discussed how that can possibly be when the death of righteous people sometimes is a Chilul Hashem. When really good Jews are stricken down, then that creates a Chilul Hashem. Like in the Holocaust, it created a degradation of Hashem's name because look how man views God as a result. So a lot of times it depends on the onlooker, the audience, the lesson that is supposed to be taken. But what I wanted to focus on a little bit today is the word bikrovai, that God had identified Nadav and Avihu as people who are very close to me. And when you look at it, you don't see at face value how they are close to Hashem. The Netziv, Reb Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin of the 19th century said that, just trying to explain Moshe's words of reconciliation to his brother Aharon, he said, Hodia lo sibat ha'onesh sheba lishnei tachlitim na'alim. He tells what Moshe was telling Aharon is that the deaths of your two sons accomplished two very important lessons. Number one, chada kedei laharot chomer mikdash v'kodoshav. Number one, it was for the purpose of to show how important the sanctity of the temple is and all of its holy things. And uchedei la'ayem bazeh ala kohanim ledorot sheyihu nizarim harbe b'kodshei Hashem. And it was also to exhort the Kohanim. They are the ones with the primary role of safeguarding the temple. So it was, number one, a lesson to the entire community about how holy the temple is. And it was secondarily a lesson to the other remaining Kohanim. Listen, guys, you got to be really, really careful. And that's V'zeh ma'amar Moshe bikrovai kadesh. That's what Moshe tells Aaron, that with my close ones I'm sanctified. I'm able to provide a very important lesson. Bivnei Adam hakrovim elav yitkadesh be'enei Yisrael. That is through people that are close to God that God is sanctified. Sheyakiru bazeh otzem kedushato v'rov ha'hechrech lihizaher b'chilul kedushato chas v'shalom. That people will thereby learn not to desecrate God's sanctity. Now, it's a little bit hard to swallow because it's a very, very harsh punishment. In the footnote of the Netziv's commentary on the Torah, the footnote has a name. The commentary of the footnotes is called Harchev Davar, to the Ha'amek Davar. And in that footnote, the Netziv writes that this is not the only case where God sanctifies himself through holy people. We also, and it's not the only case where a prominent Kohen's sons are killed because they didn't do the right thing. And there too, it is also called a Kiddush Hashem, or providing a very important lesson. What story is the Netziv referencing? He is referencing the story of Eli from the book of Samuel and his two sons. Eli had two sons who were not so good. And if you take a look at source number 4 for just a second, it says, Ve'eli zakein ma'od. Eli was quite elderly. V'shama et kol asher ya'asun banav l'chol Yisrael. And he heard what his sons were doing against the Jewish people. Ve'et asher yishkavun et hanashim hatzavaot petach oel moed. And he heard that his sons were actually bedding women who came to the Mishkan to bring their sacrifices. And he rebukes his sons very harshly in the next pasuk. Do not do this, he tells them. And if you take a look at the end of Pasuk Chaf Hey, look very carefully at the words that the Pasuk says. V'lo yishma'u l'kol avihem, ki chafetz Hashem lahamitam. They did not listen to the voice of their father because God wanted to kill them. That strikes a very strange note, does it not? They didn't listen to their father because God wanted to kill them. How is one a cause and the cause of the other? They didn't listen to their father because God... Does that mean that God did not allow them to listen to their father? Anyway, I refer you to the Rashi and Metzudos David. I have the Metzudos David over here. Basically, the Metzudos quotes Chazal that says that what their sin was not so harsh as what the Pasuk says. They were lax. They let people shmeichel them in order to cut ahead in line to bring their carbon first. They weren't so careful about bringing women's karbanos when they just had a baby because there wasn't in it as much for them, so they put other people in front of them, and this delayed women's journeys back to their husbands when they were supposed to go to mikveh, and it created a whole problem. But they were rebuked very harshly. But the theological issue that we want to focus on is, what does this mean? That the reason why they didn't listen to their father is because God wanted to kill them. What does that mean? So the Netziv writes in this footnote, he says like this, Pirish mishum hachi lo shamu musar avihen, lo shahayu ra'im kol kach bozei musar chalila. He says, it's not that they were so evil that they would normally refuse to listen to words of rebuke. Ela shehakadosh baruch hu hiksha et libam shelo yishmeu. But God actually hardens their heart, forcing them not to listen. Uchedei lahamitam, so that they would die. Ve'afal gav she'en kach midato shel hakadosh baruch hu hachafetz b'tshuva yoter mi ba'onesh. He says that's not normally God's attribute. God normally doesn't act this way to cause people to die instead of giving them the opportunity to do teshuvah. Mikol makom bivnei Eli shehaya chetam bebizyon kodshei Hashem ratzah hakadosh baruch hu laharot chomer mikdash v'kadashav. But when God had an important lesson, the important lesson of demonstrating the sanctity of my holy place is a greater lesson for the community than the individual opportunity that would normally be granted to Eli's sons to do tshuva. V'hainu dichtiv kan lemor lidorot yekain. And that's why it says in this pasuk, when Moshe is speaking to Aaron, he says, basically it's God speaking lemor, saying, Asher diber Hashem lemor bikrovaya kadesh. When Moshe tries to console Aaron, he says, God said this lemor, saying. In other words, teaching a lesson to the future generations. And sometimes a lesson that is being taught to future generations is more important than the preservation of the individual and giving that individual an opportunity to do tshuva. It's a mind-blowing concept. It's the theology behind this is that sometimes people, even good people, may not necessarily be granted the opportunity to do tshuva and to rehabilitate themselves if the greater lesson that can be learned from their deaths will help more people than their own individual teshuvah. And that's a very important idea, is that sometimes the life that I live may be fraught with misdeeds, and I won't even be allowed or given the opportunity to correct or rehabilitate myself or go back to a place where I'm supposed to be, because my role in life is to teach a greater lesson, whether in life or in death, to other people around me. Going back to what you were saying, Mrs. Wolfish, about that whole idea about sometimes we live our lives for others as well as for ourselves. And sometimes the lesson that I need to provide to others has an even greater consequence than my own personal life and my and what ends up happening to me. When I read commentaries like this, especially during this time of the year, it gets us thinking, first of all, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu had to extract the message for Aharon. I'm wondering, if Moshe wasn't there, and Aharon would have just seen his sons die, would have he been able to extract the appropriate lesson? Or was it necessary for Moshe to point it out to him? I don't know if we'll ever have an answer to that question. But certainly, the fact that the Torah records that Moshe consoled his brother and expressed to him what was going on means that there was some education happening. Not only an education to Aharon, but an education to us as well. Of this exact point. That sometimes, even though people are very, very holy, Hashem allows them to continue sinning and doesn't even give them the opportunity to rehabilitate, because he needs to use them in some way for the greater good. Just let me finish this idea, because I want to go through a text. There's a lot of Torah from Rav Kook, who was a student Rav Kook was a student of the Netziv of Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. And he came to Eretz Yisrael to help out with the Chovevei Tzion movement, with the whole movement of repopulating Eretz Yisrael and the religious Zionist ordeal. And he was a Yotzei Dofen, he was an exception, because many Rabbanim who were his colleagues in yeshiva, his dear friends, were very critical of him, because he departed from the norm, which was that when you see people who are secular Zionists, you don't associate with them, because they are very far away from Judaism. And Rav Kook felt he took a totally different approach. We take the fruit and we discard the peel. If we have the same common goal of rebuilding Eretz Yisrael, my objective in rebuilding Eretz Yisrael is to create a messianic age and an ingathering of the exiles. Your objective may be to create a national homeland that is devoid of any religious identity. That's okay. We'll work together for the greater good because our objectives overlap. And together we can realize greatness. Rav Kook was able to see that even within people who themselves were not motivated by religious objectives, were not motivated to do good for the sake of good that we as religious Jews identify, nevertheless, they may be a vehicle that Hashem is utilizing in order to achieve a greater lesson or a greater good for the sake of Klal Yisrael. It's very hard if we're living through those situations and we see secular Jews who are doing great things for Klal Yisrael. There is some part of us that says, how come they're accomplishing that good and not a religious Jew, not a pious Jew? Is it perhaps that this is not the Ratzon Hashem? But when you take the retrospective of decades of 20th century Jewish history, it becomes nearly impossible to reflect upon the chalutzim who themselves were not religious in their personal lives or outlook and say that what they did was not virtuous. I think the only people that still say that are the Neturei Karta, who are just poisoned, just poisoned by a theology that is completely morally and ethically bankrupt. Let's go to take a look at, this is a great essay from a website that was done a few years ago, a couple of years ago actually, that I think contains a tremendous amount of information. We'll try to just run through it in the English. During the controversy over the Heter Mechira in 1910, you know what the Heter Mechira, we've talked about it in the past, about the whole idea of the Shemitah year in Israel. There was a leniency that certain rabbis relied upon to allow Jews to consume produce from the Shemitah year by selling the land to Arabs. So Rav Yaakov David Vilovsky, the Ridbaz of Safat, leveled a serious accusation. He accused Rav Kook of abandoning his religious beliefs and becoming a Zionist in his old age. In fact, from a very early age, Rav Kook was imbued with a great love for Eretz Yisrael. For an Orthodox rabbi to support a secular movement that publicly proclaimed that it has nothing to do with theology was close to heresy. Why should a religious scholar with a deep love for all peoples be supportive of a secular nationalist movement? Indeed, Rav Kook's outlook on Zionism is a complex topic, the subject of numerous books and academic articles, and certainly beyond the scope of a brief essay. Nonetheless, the following excerpts from his writings and letters shed light on his views on this non-religious and sometimes anti-religious movement. Rav Kook noted that our generation is not the first to experience a return to the land of Israel comprised primarily of Jews lax in religious observance. When Ezra led the return to Eretz Yisrael in the beginning of the Second Temple period, many of the Jewish pioneers who joined him were Mechalelei Shabbos, Shabbos desecrators and worse. And yet this period witnessed the rebuilding of the temple and tremendous advances in Torah scholarship. Centuries later, during the corrupt reign of Herod, the nation suffered from a cruel king, far removed from the ideal Jewish leader. The irony of the Holy Temple built by Herod, a brutal and paranoid despot, is even greater than the current phenomenon of the Holy Land being resettled by secular pioneers. The actual construction, Rav Kook wrote, may be carried by those who fail to penetrate the profound secrets of the righteous. And not just the stonemasons, they may even be the ones orchestrating the construction. Yet this does not sully the innate purity of the lofty objective. Rav Kook suggested that we need not be overly concerned about the religious level of the pioneers, since the land on its own will determine who is deserving of living in it. There is no need to check the level of kashrus of those who come, for the land will vomit out the true chaff, and all those remaining shall be called holy. This is similar to how we do not separate food from its waste elements before we eat it, but leave this separation process to life's natural functions. Furthermore, the merit of Eretz Yisrael helps even the unworthy. The merit of the land even protects the wicked. Even a Gentile maidservant in the land of Israel is promised a portion in the world to come. Clearly, the Talmud is not speaking of a righteous maidservant who would anyway merit the world to come. Rather, it is an ordinary maidservant with sordid deeds and coarse traits. Nevertheless, the merit of living in the land of Israel enables her to gain a portion in the world to come. All the more so regarding the secular Zionists, since one may find in every Jew, even the most unworthy, precious gems of good deeds and positive traits. Certainly the land of Israel helps elevate and sanctify them, and if this is not evident in them, it will become so in their descendants. And here Rav Kook was speaking prophetically. Despite the current secular nature of Zionism, the return to Eretz Yisrael in recent times was first promoted by great tzaddikim, starting with the disciples of the Gaon of Vilna and the Baal Shem Tov. And Zionism derives its spiritual nourishment from these holy roots. Skip to the next section, breaking of the vessels. For Rav Kook, the fall of Zionism into the hands of the secularists was a form of Shvirat Kelim, reminiscent of the Kabbalistic breaking of vessels that occurs when the universe was created. The original light and holiness was simply too great to be contained within the limitations of the physical vessels, and it is our task to return these fallen sparks to their elevated source. But why did the return to the land of Israel need to be appropriated by a secular nationalist movement? Rav Kook attempted to solve this riddle by noting certain qualities lacking in religious circles. And he said the fundamental moral force hidden in the Zionist movement is its motto, the entire nation. This nationalism proclaims that it seeks to redeem the entire Jewish people. It does not concern itself with individuals or parties or sectors. And with this perspective, it reaches out to the land of Israel and the love of Zion with a remarkable bravery and courage. It is clear that we cannot confront this adversary if we lack the same noble sense of responsibility that speaks in the name of the entire nation, all of Israel. We may not distinguish and divide. We may not say, this one is one of ours, so we will take care of him, but not that one. We must care in our hearts and souls for the good of the entire nation and its redemption in the most inclusive way possible. Additionally, Rav Kook explained that the pre-Messianic era requires a more practical, down-to-earth orientation, so that the Jewish people may return to their land as a healthy, balanced nation after centuries of detached statelessness and exile. We have a tradition that there will be a spiritual revolt of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael during the initial period of national revival. The aspirations for lofty and holy ideals will seize and the nation's spirit will sink. The necessity for this revolt will be the tendency for materialism, which must be powerfully generated in the entire nation after the passage of so many years in which the need and availability of material pursuits were completely absent. When born, this proclivity will trample angrily and stir up storms. These are the birth pangs of the Amos HaMashiach. However, secular Zionism can only bring about the material rebuilding of the Jewish people in their homeland. The nation's complete renewal will only come about when Zionism is restored to its original holiness. Secular Zionism, secular nationalism may be defiled with much defilement, concealing many evil spirits. But we will not succeed by trying to expel this movement from the nation's soul. Rather, we must energetically return to its elevated source and combine it with the original holiness from which it emanates. And what about the Ribaz's accusation that Rav Kook had descended to heresy, becoming a secular Zionist? Rav Kook responded that Zionism, when based on its true ideals, is nothing to be ashamed of. My dear friend, if all Zionists would love the land of Israel and seek the settlement of the Holy Land for the same reason and holy goal that I have in mind, because it is God's land, special and beloved out of the entire world, containing unique holy qualities that foster prophecy and divine inspiration, Allah the Kuzari, then it would be certainly a great honor for every important rabbi and Torah scholar and tzaddik to be such a Zionist. Even your honor should find nothing objectionable in this form of Zionism. And so therefore, to summarize the salient points in Rav Kook's view on Zionism, these are the 4 bulleted points that the author concludes. Number 1, there are historical precedents for significant Jewish movements in which irreligious Jews played a major role. 2, the special merits of Eretz Yisrael will elevate those who participate in its settlement and rebuilding. 3, the original roots of Zionism are holy, going back to the disciples of the Gaon of Vilna and the Baal Shem Tov. Zionism must be returned to these authentic holy roots. And finally, the success of secular Zionism is due to its non-sectarian concern for the entire Jewish people, and it serves as a necessary correction for the imbalances caused by centuries of statelessness. And so, really my point of connection here is that many times you need a Moshe Rabbeinu to point this out, to point out the events in history that have taken place through less than perfect people, that even the deaths of people like Eli's sons can actually help create a Kiddush Hashem, even though they themselves were not deemed worthy of redemption. Redemption can take place through sinful acts as well, as long as they're directed towards the right objectives. We learned in the Daf Yomi today that a sin that is done l'shem shamayim is as great as a mitzvah that's done when it's not l'shem shamayim, when it's not for the sake of heaven. So I just thought that was worthy of thinking about. There's so many different ways of getting across this message. But history seems to have proven Rav Kook to be correct. We would not have a state of Israel today if it were not for secular Zionists who were very far from Judaism. That does not mean that the Zionist endeavor was a flawed endeavor. It just means that Hashem sometimes uses utensils that are less than perfect to get the job done in this imperfect world. You get the last word. Does anyone want the last word? Yes?
Couldn't resist. I was just thinking regarding what we discussed in the last class, that when something terrible happens to you, to say it's all for the good is such a high madrega. Most people are not capable of that. And when Aaron lost his 2 sons, it says Vayidom Aharon, and he was quiet. And even that is considered so praiseworthy that he didn't cry out in pain and say, Hashem, why? But he was quiet. So I look at it like what you discussed in the first class is an extremely high madrega. Not everybody can have something tragic happen to them and say, this is all for the good. But even if you're just quiet, that's also extremely praiseworthy.
Agreed. Point very well taken. Yeah, anyone else? Okay. Have a great day. We'll see you next week in Mitzvah Hashem. Take care.